Hello, everyone. I'm Jane Shulak. As the founder of Culture Lab Detroit, I'm delighted to welcome you back to our third year of conversation and collaboration. That is the mission of Culture Lab Detroit, to spark collaboration within Detroit's cultural scene and between Detroit and the rest of the creative world. Tonight, as we walked into this conversation, each of us passed by an installation of moss and concrete block that is both enchanting and provocative. We thank Detroit architect Becky Nix for this beautiful creation and for representing exactly what is taking hold at this moment in our city. Hard, gritty edges coming together with lush green spaces to give way to a new day in Detroit. Tonight, we are here to think about and even revel in this exciting moment in our city's history when the sharp edges of our past are beginning to give way to a fresh, green future. This discussion of green space in Detroit was inspired by the food movement, the city's vast amount of acreage, and the feral ruins returning to the earth. Detroit, like so many cities today, is being revitalized and rethought by efforts that include urban gardens, reuse of material, and alternative energy systems. And our guests this evening all communicate and practice their particular art by embracing the urban landscape. The environment is their medium. Please allow me to introduce our esteemed guests. Urban farmer Will Allen, a former basketball star with a towering presence and superpower ability to see what others cannot. He looks at an empty urban lot and sees a garden big enough to feed a city, bringing fresh, nutritious food to every table. He is the author of The Good Food Revolution, which conveys the universal value of social justice and real food. His real superpower is finding a solution to any problem, which is why he was named a MacArthur Foundation genius. Botanist and designer Patrick Blanc. Patrick invented the concept of the vertical garden and has been on a 25-year quest to blanket walls across the planet with plant-based creations. He has collaborated with the world's most important architects, including Herzog and de Meuron, Cesar Pelli, Andre Putman, Kengo Kuma, and Jean Nouvel, who dubbed him the Green Man, as together they created the world's tallest installation of plant climbers in Kuala Lumpur. Altogether, he has created more than 250 vertical gardens all over the world. Alice Waters. Alice is going to be with us this evening via Skype because she just this afternoon received the National Humanities Medal of Honor from Barack Obama at the White House. Alice is a chef, author, food activist, and owner of the renowned San Francisco restaurant Chez Panisse. Alice has been a champion of local sustainable agriculture for more than 4 decades. She is the vice president of Slow Food International and the founder of the Edible Schoolyard Project, the revolutionary education model that has brought thousands of school children into a new relationship with food. And finally, our moderator, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, a native Detroiter. Stephen worked as a reporter and editorial writer in Baltimore, Washington, and Chicago before finding his way back to Detroit, where he is the editorial page editor for the Detroit Free Press, and where his writing last year won him the Pulitzer Prize. He is also the host of radio and television programs, and his voice sets the tone for some of the most important conversations in our city, including the one we are about to have this evening. Let's pause for just a moment to hear a bit about our guests and their work in their own words.
I call this a delicious revolution. What we're trying to do here at the Edible Schoolyard with Edible Education is to bring food into the context of nature and culture. That's where all the beauty and meaning is. The best things take time, like growing food or cooking or getting to know someone. It's amazing how quickly those lessons are digested. If they go out in the garden, it's the greatest thing to watch. It's a kind of magic happens when they fall in love with nature.
People need to take responsibility for some of their own healthy food, and the best way to do that is to grow it yourself. I'm a rural agriculture person that came into the city. I had a 100-acre farm, and in '93 I bought the last remaining farm in the city of Milwaukee. What we do here is create a food system that works for the community, that works for everybody. We have 7,000 pounds of worms that we inject into our compost. We feed about 10,000 people just from this farm alone. My personal goal is to be a part of helping to end world hunger, which is a lofty goal that probably won't happen in my lifetime. I hope it does.
I'm a French botanist, a scientist at the National Center of Scientific Research, and more than 40 years ago I did create the vertical gardens. The opportunity also with vertical gardens is that I travel all over the world, even in some very remote places. I always find new adaptation of the plants, and also for my vertical gardens I can find new species that I was never using before. A vertical garden is very simple, stapled on a plastic sheet, and it's exactly the same as the mosses covering the rocks in forest. It's a new approach of the relation between the plants, the man, and the cities.
My own life and my own history are testament to what's possible in America. So I always was brought up with a sense of obligation to the city. I don't think there's any question that if Dr. King were alive today, he'd be working in Detroit, trying to untangle that snarl of poverty and racism. There is higher interest in the city than I can ever remember there being, and that interest is genuine.
We are in for a fascinating conversation this evening. But before we move forward, I'd like to pause for just a moment to thank two people who have helped make this evening possible. The president of the College for Creative Studies, Rick Rogers, and the former director of Detroit Creative Corridor Center, Matt Clayson. Thank you, Rick and Matt, for your vision and your unending support. With that, let's begin our conversation. I present to you our moderator, Stephen Henderson.
Okay, thank you for inviting me here. It's great to see everybody all gathered here. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. We have a very far-flung panel today. People doing lots of really interesting things, not all obviously connected. I think my job is to try to draw some of those connections, and then we're going to get you involved. We're going to take a lot of questions from the audience. But really quickly, I want to talk about this idea of greening in Detroit and the politics and possibilities of gardening and greening change here in the city. You know, I grew up here, I was born here. I was talking to someone earlier about the DeQuinder Cut. They were talking about how wonderful that is and this wonderful green space that we have now in the city. I was a toddler in the Lafayette Towers in the 1970s and could look over into the DeQuinder Cut and watch trains. That was what I saw it as. So that's how much change I've seen in this city in just sort of a nutshell. I think when we talk about green in this city, a lot of times we talk about what's not possible and what we don't have. We think about what's around us in the negative. We think about the 20 square miles of quote-unquote empty space, as opposed to thinking about 20 square miles of actual green and potential. And I think through panels like this and discussions like this, and hopefully the work that follows, we can start to change that mindset for ourselves and for each other. So with that, I want to welcome our guests tonight. Alice Waters, who I know we have by Skype. Is Alice here?
I hope I'm there.
There she is. Welcome. Will Allen, who is here visiting from Milwaukee.
Hi, Will.
And Patrick Blanc, visiting us from France. Welcome. Before we start, I want to say something about how people here are dressed tonight. A lot of people are wearing green, and no one told me that we were supposed to be wearing green. So I have on blue, but Patrick takes the absolute prize for outfit. And Patrick, hold up your hands. Look at his fingernail. His fingernails are green. That's really going above and beyond, right? Alice, I want to start with you. First, congratulations on your award yesterday from President Obama. That's a huge accomplishment. She's wearing it.
It was today, or I would be there.
I want to start with you and talk about this concept of the edible schoolyard. A very quick look at it says you're teaching kids about urban gardening, about greening. But I suspect that over the 20 years that you've been doing it, there is a lot more that's going on. There's a lot more that's happening between you and those kids, between those kids and each other, and between those kids and the spaces in which they live.
Well, there is a lot more going on. And when we first started the project 20 years ago, I had the whole idea in my mind that if the kids who came to school, and these are middle school children, about 1,000 of them at a middle school, Martin Luther King in Berkeley, California. And I thought it would be a really good test case, because they speak 22 different languages at home in that school. But I didn't just want to make a garden in the school. From the very beginning, I thought that these students needed to have the entire experience, sort of working in the garden, cooking food in the kitchen, and eating a real school lunch together at the table. And so I told the principal of the school that that's what we wanted to do. And he said, I'll have to get back to you. And I thought that was that was the end. And then 6 months later, he called me back and he said, let's begin. And let's begin with the garden, because everybody will be upset if we start talking about a free school lunch. So that's just, will be a little conversation between the two of us. But let's just focus on the garden. And we never saw the garden as, teaching gardening per se. We always saw it as a lab for learning every subject. Math, science, art, we would do those in the lab of the garden. And when we built a kitchen classroom, we saw it the same way, that it would be a place where kids could cook, but it was part of a history class, and they may be studying Egyptian history, and they would be cooking the food of that place. And it would deepen their understanding, and it would increase their just awareness about what it was they were learning. I guess you might say that I applied all of the principles of Montessori education that I had learned to a pedagogy of edible education. And I have to say, it's worked like a charm, because these students, and these are teenagers, they really are engaged with the work, with the academic schoolwork that they learn in the kitchen and the garden.
Okay.
And I feel like, just one last thing,
yeah,
is
go ahead.
like when they graduate from 8th grade, any one of them could give a little TED Talk.
Very good. Will, you're coming to us from Milwaukee, and I'm really curious about just the lay of the land in Milwaukee. Here in Detroit, we tend to think of ourselves as exceptional. That the things we face, the problems we have, the things we've accomplished, we're unique. We're snowflakes in the universe, and we couldn't learn anything from anybody else. Milwaukee, though, is a place that is a lot like Detroit and has a lot of the same opportunities and challenges with regard to space. Give us a good overview of what is going on there and how your work fits into it.
Yeah, well, what I bring into the situation is I come from a rural farm background. When I was researching the book, The Good Food Revolution, and I didn't know this, my family farming legacy or heritage goes back over 400 years of continuous farming. So that's significant in that most of everybody in this room, family was connected to farming at one point in securing food for their families, but that stopped about 5 generations ago when we became dependent on other people to source our food. So I've always been involved as a youth and so forth, and when I came to Milwaukee 40 years ago, I had a burning desire to get back into actually owning a farm and operating a farm, and I got kind of sucked in. I bought the last remaining farm in the city of Milwaukee, and I started as a for-profit organization, and I started working with youth in the community, hiring them, and my friend said, why don't you start this nonprofit? So I kind of got sucked into this by working with kids, as many of us do. But to tell you what the landscape was like back then, there were a lot of naysayers when I started doing this work. People said that this wouldn't work. You couldn't change the dynamics of a community by growing food in the city because of all the challenges of growing food in the city in terms of most of the land is asphalt and concrete. But in my past and when I was growing up, we composted. So that was the first thing we did, was to grow soil. the only way we can grow food in these cities around the country, which I've visited and worked in almost every city over the 22 years of doing this, we have to be able to grow new soil, high fertility soil. So that's what we did first. And the other thing that we did was to really start building relationships first with the community around us, and then the rest of the community in southeast Wisconsin, and the politicos and different folks and medical folks and corporations and so forth, to be able to be a part of this, because everybody, to make this work, even though this was a grassroots kind of movement, we also needed those folks. So when you look at Milwaukee today, we can farm in every zoning district in the city of Milwaukee, which is unusual. We can compost in your backyard. If you wanted to compost in your backyard, you can compost up to 50 yards of compost. You can have compost operations up to 5,000 yards of production an annual year, or at one time on the site. So a lot of things have changed over those years. We kind of call Milwaukee the urban ag capital of the world because we have a mayor that supports what we're doing. We have a organization within city government called Growing Milwaukee, Homegrown Milwaukee, that supports and makes sure that we have the essential things that we need, like water, which is necessary, even though we're sitting right on a Great Lake, just like you all are. There are also water policies that were out of date that we had to change. But I think the thing that really changed policy in Milwaukee was the fact that we were able to do something concrete, that we could use that as an inspirational piece to bring people not only from Milwaukee but all over the world. Today there's 30,000 people that visit our facility, our home-based. We farm about 300 acres of land, about 25 acres of greenhouses, and we train people from all over the world. But it's taken 22 years. We're in our 22nd year. So this change that you're trying to do in Detroit is going to take time. It's going to take patience. Even though you have all of this land you just talked about, the policies have to be in place. And we have to be able to grow farmers. The average age of farmers in this country is my age, in mid-60s. I won't tell you how old I am, but close to that. So we have to grow these new farmers. We have to inspire these young people to want to farm. And the best place to learn how to cut your teeth on farming, even if you have aspirations of going into the rural community, is in the city where land is available, almost free most of the time. So I look at this as a way of healing a lot of things. Food is the most important thing in all of our lives. Even though we don't realize it, we've taken it for granted, but our food system is really messed up. And we have to change it, and the only way to change it is we're going to have to change it. We're waiting around for other people, the government and other people to change it, but we're going to have to change it. You have a tremendous opportunity here. You have some wonderful programs here, D-Town Farms, Malik Keeney's group, and Ashley Atkinson, the work that she's done since I've known her since she was very young, and other groups, Greening of Detroit, and I'm not going to name all the groups I've worked with in Detroit, but I've spent a lot of time here over the years collaborating and working and training folks from Detroit. So I think you all have a tremendous opportunity, but everybody's got to be on board. It can't be done with it can't be done on the backs of a few farmers or whatever. So everybody's got to be on board. So I'll stop there because I get going. I'll talk about this stuff.
Patrick, a lot of your most notable work is in cities that are really, really dense. Places like Sydney, Miami, Bangkok, and yet you're interested, Paris, where you're from, and yet you're really interested in Detroit, a place that is not as dense, that is much more wide open. Talk to me a little bit about how you see that opportunity in Detroit and how it might differ from those other places.
You know, bonsoir. First of all, sorry for my English, because as most French people, you know, accent is not very good, and also vocabulary is very poor. But I'll try my best. No, you know, for my scientific research, I work mostly in tropical countries, and especially on the growth habits of the plants growing in the shade of tropical rainforest. And only since about 10 years, I was more interested also by temperate country. For instance, my country, France, because before I did know much better the plants from Malaysia or Amazonia than plants from France. And so I did visit more and more temperate countries, and colder and colder. And when I came in Detroit, it was in last June. It was not cold, of course, but it was very interesting, because when I did see, you know, when I know that you have minus in Celsius degrees, and when you have minus 20 or minus 30 sometimes degrees in winter during sometimes long spells, I was very, very surprised to see on your old abandoned buildings, for especially car factory buildings, when I did see so many trees growing on these old abandoned places. For me, it was really a shock, because it was almost the same thing that was what I can see in tropical countries, in old abandoned buildings. So I did try to understand, and of course it's very cold, but hopefully you have a lot of snow, so the snow is protecting a little bit the base of these trees growing at the top of the buildings, and also when it's a little bit more warm, warmer during some parts of the winters, water is available for the plants. So for me, I think it's really interesting to see that something is possible where I did think it was not possible to have plants able to grow on old buildings. So according to my work, because my work is to install plants on buildings all over the world, but mostly in warmer places, I understand that here it's possible to do a work, because due to your history of the city, you have many places where we see that nature already came back. So for me, Detroit, for me, is a very new experience and very interesting. And also when I did see the work which has been done according, for instance, to the along the rivers, the new places where you have wetlands with frogs and ducks and many animals, and there's so many different species of plants growing there. So for me, it's also one important thing. Here you have it's very funny, because catalpa, you know, is a tree which is grown everywhere in Europe. But in Europe, we are growing the species which is more southern, which has much smaller and much less beautiful flowers. And here you have the species from the northern area, which is the Catalpa speciosa, which is much more beautiful with bigger flowers. And it's a pity, because in France, we are cultivating in Europe only the species from the south, which is not so beautiful as the one you can see everywhere here in the forest around Detroit. So it's always many surprises, and so I was happy for that.
Okay, thank you. I want to give Patrick no end of credit for coming here and speaking. His English is far better than my French would be. So better that he speaks the other language than me. Alice, I want to ask you about the impact that you've seen that goes beyond that one school, that Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School in Berkeley, which is where you started 20 years ago. What has the work done beyond those walls, and what has it changed, not just in terms of, I guess, physical change or evidence, but in terms of the conversation even in the community, the culture around this whole idea of green and sustainable food?
3 years ago, we started collecting the best practices of edible education around the country, around the world. And it is really amazing what has gone on. We were looking for people who would put into our website a project that they might have in a garden or in a kitchen or in the cafeteria of a school or the curriculum as well. And at first, it had a little bit of a slow start. But in the last year, it has just multiplied geometrically. We went from having 3,000 to over 5,000 in the last 2 years. So clearly, something is happening. And it's not just happening, I don't think, in terms of schools. It's happening in terms of restaurants that are connecting with farms, and where it's very clear that the farm to restaurant movement is multiplying geometrically as well. I've also traveled a lot because of my slow food connection, and I'm just delighted to hear the Pope talking about farming, small farmers who take care of the land and who can grow food to feed people. And it's a beautiful idea that has always, I think, been thought to be sort of a counterculture idea, that small farmers who take care of the land can actually feed us. But I know that it can happen that way, and it needs to be supported in by the powers that be.
Okay. Will, I'm curious about political pushback to the things that you're trying to do in Milwaukee. Obviously here in Detroit, we are a city very rich in political argument and conflict, to put it mildly. I would imagine that Milwaukee is somewhat similar, and that when you started talking about doing what you were doing, not everybody stood up and cheered. That a lot of people maybe said, well, hold on a second. This is my neighborhood. Right. This is my city. I don't necessarily want what you're doing in my neighborhood. Talk about how that got resolved, or if it did, and sort of how you meet that opposition.
Well, I think one of the first things you have to do, quite frankly, is to engage the community. And our community engagement was with the youth at the beginning, because you know, that's what we started out as, a youth serving organization. And I think most of the organizations around the country are still youth organizations that are doing community gardens, and just like Alice talked about in the schools, that's really grown all over the country. But I think that helped us. But the thing that I mentioned before, you have to show something, you have to do something, you have to have something very concrete to show people. So when they came, and I realized that right away, in terms of having something really small, probably wouldn't influence, especially politicos, you know, that came to visit. So, and being a pretty large-scale farmer, you know, I farmed 100 acres on my own farm. I wanted to build something that people would get excited about if they saw it, and I think that's what really helped us and helped the movement overall, to be able to see that this is possible. It is possible to, on 3 acres, to feed 10,000 people very intensively, to be able to grow fish, to be able to have this integrated ag system on a small space, and to use vertical space. So we're not just growing on one plane. Inside the greenhouses that were built in the late 1920s, we're growing on like 7 different levels to maximize the space, this high-valued space. And the other thing that was coming into play was climate change in terms of crop crop failures that many of my farmer friends were having. They were growing food outside. So we started building hoop houses from scratch, buying the raw material and being able to build that out and creating jobs. And as time along that continuum started to happen, we started hiring people. We hired 150 folks through a job workforce development program, and many of those had felony records. To be able to train them, to get them off the street, which would help with the tremendous crime problems that we have in Milwaukee, to really, because this whole thing is really about social justice and food justice, environmental justice, to make sure that people's lives improve in these communities. And I believe that food is a way of doing that, to changing the food system, to creating jobs, to make sure that people have adequate food. It's a shame in America that every night 3 out of 10 young people go to bed without a meal. That's a shame that we all should be ashamed of and try to fix. But we can't do it, on, like I said before, on the backs of farmers, on the backs of one organization or whatever. We're going to have to work together in this. So as I was starting to think about how we're going to continue to do this work, because I believe, and I talk about this all the time now, I believe that nonprofits are not going to scale this up. It's going to come from entrepreneurs. There's a role for nonprofits to train folks. But our farm, even though it's the largest urban farm in the world, and the only reason it wasn't designed to be that way, the only reason that it is that way is because we had to prove that we could change the dynamics. We had to prove that we could grow enough food on our farms to engage. Today we deliver to 8 wholesalers, from Cisco to many of the major wholesalers, because we need to realize that most people, even though we have 4,800 farmers markets in this country, we have CSAs, we have all of this local smaller scale stuff, we have to scale it up. And we have to bring the good organic food into the retail grocery stores, because that's where most of us shop. That's where most of our population in this country shop.
Yeah. What's been the reaction of the administration, the political culture in Milwaukee to what you're doing? You mentioned in your first answer that the mayor is sort of an ally, I guess, of the food movement. Was that always true, or has that changed over time?
We had a mayor before, John Norquist, who was a very green mayor. So that's where it started many years ago with John Norquist. And then when Tom Barrett, who was our congressman, visited Growing Power, he didn't even know we existed until another Marcy Captor, who I did some work with, was on the House floor and said, "Do you know this guy named Will Allen in Milwaukee?" And he said, "No." And she said, "Well, you better go see him." And he visited, and since then, he's been, I think, four-time, won the last 4 elections, and started a program called Homegrown Milwaukee, and they have employees that work with different organizations. So they're on board. When we designed our vertical farm, which would be the first true vertical farm in the world, with greenhouses on top of each other and multi-use facility, we got a unanimous vote in the city council. So, you know, the politicos are on board. Do they give us money? Absolutely not.
Of course not. Of course not. That would make them useful.
You know. Because that's one of the big challenges in this work, that we have to get money for sustainable agriculture. We have to fix the next farm bill to shift money from commodity payments to these corporations that own these 50, 60,000 acre farms to folks, and we have to get money to train more farmers. Many of these organizations in the city, and there's a lot. I heard there's 1,500 gardens here. Those gardens need compost, they need other things that they don't have the capital for. So we have to change that in DC and get USDA to really look at what we're doing on a sustainable side of things.
Yeah. Patrick, last year, the Wall Street Journal ran an article about you in which you explained how the vertical garden works. And I was really interested in that explanation. So I want you to start with that. Tell us how the whole idea works, but then also pivot and tell us a little about what you see as the potential for vertical gardens here in Detroit. Where would that work? Why would it work? And how would it help the city?
Yeah, just as I always say, to make a vertical garden is simply to staple a floor mop on a plastic sheet. So it's absolutely nothing about the techniques, and with a pipe with some holes at the top. So technique is absolutely nothing. The only important thing is, of course, to know which species you are installing on your floor mop, which is fixed on a plastic sheet. So actually, when I did begin this, when I was 12 years old, something like that, it was not at all to make vertical gardens. It was actually to have a biological filter for my aquarium, because I was fond of tropical fish since I was very, very young, 6 or 7 years old. So I did begin like this, so to a pump with recycling water. So it was just to extract all the excess of mineral salts, especially nitrogen or nitrates, which accumulate in aquarium. So step by step, year after year, I did install more and more plants above the aquarium. And finally, it became a vertical garden, because finally I did put the aquarium on the floor, and I had a big sheet of wood covered with mosses and the plants, and more plants above. So like this, after it was a little bit famous. I had some articles already since about 40 years. In '78, the first full page explaining that I was growing plants like this. And after I did never think when I was doing this that it could one day be interesting for architects or designers or artistic world or for food. I did not think at all. For me, it was a kind of collection of plants which was possible to have together different species in a quite small environment. So after that, when I was invited for commission works, at the beginning it was mostly artistic works. Before architects, it was mostly the contemporary art who was interested by my work, so I did make many exhibitions, which at the beginning were supposed to be temporary, but actually all of my works did remain and are still existing now. And after, I did work with architects, and I had more and more projects, and now, of course, I have projects all over the world. And I'm happy because actually I did create a new job, and not only a new job in the world, but also a new way to try to understand the relation between human beings, between plants, and between the city. And you have this kind of a triangle: the plants, the city, and us. And I think it's a kind of a new way, because this is a three-dimensional approach of this relation between all these things is really something new. And I did make a conference, for instance, a few months ago in China, and there were 1,500 people, all doing also vertical gardens, but they did love me, and they wanted all photos with me because they didn't know I did begin this. So it means it was a good idea. And of course, it's a good idea, same as what you are explaining about the new ways to try to have again vegetables inside.
Can I interrupt you just for a minute? I want to make sure, Alice Waters is going to have to leave us at 8:10. So I want to give her just a chance to sort of give a closing to the audience just about your impressions of Detroit. We haven't had you talk about that yet. So, and then we'll come back to Patrick.
The reason I have to leave in 5 minutes is because I have to catch the last plane out of Baltimore to Detroit so that I can come and visit more farms tomorrow morning.
Well, there you go.
I have to say I was very impressed with the group of people that I met the other day, the day before yesterday. No, it was yesterday. And I realized that you really have the possibility of feeding children in schools with food that actually could be grown in the city of Detroit. This one school had the greenhouses, and it was quite amazing to see the quantity of food that could be produced and the kind of enthusiasm about that and the eagerness of the cafeteria staff to use that food and make it work economically for the whole system. So I guess that's where I'm trying to go. I'm really trying to go to the place where all children are fed a nutritious, delicious, sustainable school lunch for free. Because that's the place of really equality in this country, is in the public schools. And I consider that the last democratic institution that we have. And it's a way to bring every child into a new relationship to food and to the land. So I kind of imagine a program where schools support farms. Schools buy from the local sustainable farms, and that gives them the security of making the money they need to make to continue to do their precious work. And if we had I think it has to come from the top. As to why I was so excited to talk with the president today, because we need a national mandate to do this. Even if there is not the money right away to do it, we need to know where we're going. And back in the 60s, Kennedy got this whole country to bring physical education into the public schools, into the core curriculum. And it wasn't because he put money to it, but it was because he brought cheerleading to it. He believed in it himself. And I think we need that kind of support, belief that public education is the most important way to address all the problems of this world. And children are so precious and so impressionable that we need to take care of them. And I guess the best way is to feed them something that is nutritious and delicious and bring them back to their senses. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and go catch your plane. Don't miss your plane.
Okay, I won't.
Okay, Patrick, we were talking about vertical gardens and getting to the idea of where and how vertical gardens might fit in here in Detroit.
In Detroit, yeah. No, so, of course, also vertical gardens can be also. You did say you did, for instance, installing greenhouses at different levels. So also. Vertical gardens are not only aesthetic or simply screens against cold insulation for cold or heat in summer. It can be also used, of course, for cultivating plants for food or for like herbs and different spices. It's very easy. So, of course, when you think about Detroit, you have to think either indoor or outdoor. Indoor is, of course, very easy because indoor environment are the same all over the world. In Detroit, it's the same as Bangkok. You have always about 20 degrees Celsius. Outdoor, of course, it's totally different because you have to keep in mind the very cold and long winter you have. So, of course, in this case, you have to use plants like dwarf conifers, which can have a very good, good way to resist to very cold and transpiration weather in winter. You have to use plants which lose the foliage, the leaves in winter, which are caducous. So it's possible. I did do recently a work in New York, for instance, so with plants which are, I did use 75 species able to withstand minus 20 or minus 30 degrees in winter. So it is possible. But also, I think in Detroit, what is also interesting is that, for instance, for all the old buildings, many of them will never be subject to rehabilitation. So these buildings, I think it's very interesting to try simply with simple ways of irrigation, something like that, to introduce more species you have the story of Detroit is like this. You have huge factories which will, for many tens of years, remain like this. So I think with these places also there is very interesting work to do to introduce more plants simply by helping with some irrigation places. So to show, because the story of Detroit, you are now growing again, you have many new spaces and you have a new life in Detroit, but it's very important to keep in mind all this. And I think that we can improve all this way in which the plants are already taking the space of Detroit. And also about a botanical, more strictly botanical point of view, you have many places because you have many new gardens along the river and the different places. Also to try, because you have only the very common pioneer species which are invading, so it's good. You have already some trees growing, but it should be very good also to introduce. You have a very rich flora in your forest, so it should be good now to try to introduce more post-pioneer, so more species from mature forests. So there are many different ways, I think, to work in Detroit according to this incredible story of your city, and to take care of all this story and to try to have different steps in the way to introduce plants.
Okay, thank you. Will, I want to give you a chance to address some of the specifics about what you see here in Detroit. As you said, you're here a lot and have spent some time with folks here who are doing the same things. And then when Will is done, we're going to take questions. So are we having people line up at the mics for questions? I don't know. Okay. Yes. So if you have questions, as Will is speaking, start making your way toward the microphones in either of the aisle.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Patrick was talking about in terms of vertical farms. I was in July on a presidential delegation in Milan, Italy, for the Milan Expo, and the American Pavilion has a vertical wall growing vegetables that goes up, I think, 4 stories. Every 10 minutes it flexes to bring in air, and it's very effective. And we're going to need that kind of technology that they have at the American Pavilion. So you can go online and Google American Pavilion at the Milan Expo. The Milan Expo is, and I know a lot of people, they haven't advertised it very well in this country, but millions of people are visiting that, and the US Pavilion is absolutely outstanding. If you get a chance before end of October, you should fly over there and check it out. It's like the World's Fair, is what it's like. Many countries are participating in that, but this vertical wall, I was there with Alonzo Mourning, and we were just amazed at the amount of plants you can grow vertically. So this idea that you have and the experience you have and the fact that you're going to be working in Detroit, I advise you all to try to track him down and use some of his techniques, because there are so many old buildings that could be, it would be so aesthetically pleasing to actually mix flowers and edible plants and herbs and vegetables into these vertical, build these vertical walls where we just recycle the water, we pump the water up, and it drips down through the columns, and we reuse that water. It can be very, not only aesthetically pleasing, but very green, kind of a green thing to do.
Yeah. What about scale? One of the debates here in Detroit is about scale, small operations versus really big ones that some people have proposed for the vast areas where there isn't much else really going on.
Well, one of the things that we have to do is we have to scale this thing up. The industrial food system's been here a long time. We're not going to change it overnight. It's going to take a long time. We have to have patience. The reality is that we don't have enough farmers, so we have to grow some farmers. Everybody wants this good food. Everybody wants this local food, but we do not have enough farmers. That's the reality. We have to change those policies. Like I said before, you have the land, but if the policies aren't in place, some neighborhoods, I wouldn't advocate for us to just take all the vacant land and say, let's grow food on this vacant land. Where are the people going to live? So it has to be done in a very strategic way. It has to be well planned. We can't just grow food on every vacant lot you see or every board up that has to come down in the city, because we face that same situation in Milwaukee, in Chicago, where we have farms in Chicago where they have 33 square miles of vacant land in Chicago, 77,000 vacant lots. But some of that has to be done for development in the communities, not so much on the lakefront. Because as I travel to these cities all over the country, I see development on the lakefront. I see very little development in the communities in these cities. And if you live in this city and the city isn't whole, if people are suffering in one neighborhood, it's going to affect everybody, whether you believe it or not. You cannot run away from this problem. They tried to do it in Milwaukee. Where there was tremendous white flight to the suburbs, but you always have to come back to the city. The stadiums are there, the culture is there. We need to have safe cities. The only way we're going to have safe cities is we're going to have to create industries, and I believe the food system industry is an industry that can change the dynamics of all of these cities in America.
Okay, let's start with the questions. We'll start on this side, then we'll come to that side, then we'll go back to this side.
Okay, thank you.
Light is
holding the mic. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. It's been very inspiring to hear you speak. This question is for Mr. Allen. You spoke about the importance of policy, and here in Detroit, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, we are not allowed to have farm animals in our backyards, chickens, goats, that type of thing. Do you have any suggestions in terms of strategies in order to change the policy to be more friendly to urban agriculture?
Well, I think we have to work on different levels. We have to work on the local level, the state level, and the federal level. We need to really have an Office of Urban Agriculture in DC. It's something that I'm trying to work on, to create an office so we'll be able to go up on the hill and so our voices can be heard before this next farm bill. And that's going to take support from local communities, everybody who is following what's happening. And that's important. But the local policies, I don't know all the policies that you have here. If you're able to have chickens and and bees in the backyard like we do in Milwaukee, and goats and things like that. You know, small ruminant animals. You know, that's a big move. That's a big change.
Is that permitted in Milwaukee?
Yeah.
It is. You can have any sort of livestock?
Small animals.
Small animals.
Yeah.
Okay.
We consider worms a livestock too.
They're animals.
But one of the things that you might want to think about is expanding, which is the fastest growing piece of agriculture that's friendly to young people like yourself, is aquaponics. Aquaponics is a symbiotic relationship between plants and fish grown in the same system. That you can do it inside buildings, you can do it in hoop houses, greenhouses, you can do it underground inside the hoop houses. That's the fastest growing sector of agriculture. A board has just been put together to get aquaculture organically certified in America. It's not organically certified in America. Everywhere else in the world it is. So we need to make that change to the world body. I would find out what the policies are. Again, you need to have an example, and there are some wonderful examples of farms that have scaled up a bit that you can take your politicos to, because, you know, just going down there at City Hall and talking to them, we've tried that. That doesn't work. You got to get them out of those offices, get them out to a project. And I want to talk about one really important project that relates to what Alice was talking about. It's the Detroit director, food service director, Betty, what's your last name? Is Betty here? Wiggins. Betty Wiggins has a wonderful project working. We visited yesterday. It's a tremendous opportunity where you see kids at work in these schools. This hands-on education that leads to academic excellence is the way most of us learn, by touching and feeling things. And I think our education system is starting to recognize that in this hands-on education. So Betty Wiggins' program needs to be supported. She's sourcing food from local farmers, regional farmers into the school, and a lot of people don't know about that. So I think we need to support her and what she's doing, because I think that's one of the keys to Detroit, and the Detroit public school system and private schools and all.
Okay.
I hope I answer your question.
Over here.
Hi, I live in Detroit and have for a number of years, but I wanted to commend you for mentioning the Farm Bill, and I was wondering what other organizations you're working with, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of what the Farm Bill means in terms of organic farming and also in terms of our food chain. And I was wondering what other groups you work with to organize to try to push the Farm Bill in more progressive directions.
Yeah, there's a National Sustainable whatever organization in DC that's been representing small farmers, but mostly small rural farmers. But when we're talking about urban agriculture, there's hardly anybody that's talking about urban agriculture. So we need to create an organization and an office in DC to be able to go up on the hill and talk to those folks. So if anybody's interested in that work or funding that work, because it's going to take a lot of funding to be able to house people in DC to be able to do that work.
Over here.
Excuse me. My name is Lorenzo Herron. I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Detroit, an urban farmer. And I had a question. I went away to school for a couple of years, and upon returning, I really got enthralled into the urban agriculture scene, and I found it quite difficult to enter into the scene because the issue around land in the city of Detroit is very complicated. It's a very political issue, and it's a very economic issue, if you can get it. And I was just going to ask you, do you have any suggestions on like working on land trust in the city of Detroit? Because what often happens is it's a great barrier of entry, and the way the political system unfolds is that they kind of try and use the economic barriers to keep people out. So, oh, you don't have enough capital to manage this land, or you don't have enough capital to buy the land, essentially. Yeah. So do you have any tips and suggestions for working with community people, peers, to work along the issues of land trust?
Yeah, that's an important, I'm glad you brought that up, because in the city of Cleveland, there's a rule, the Western Reserve Land Trust is now buying vacant land in Cleveland, and they're passing that and putting it into long-term use. Because, you know, it takes a lot. If you take a vacant lot here, chances are that land is contaminated and you're gonna have to bring in a lot of compost. You can't grow in the existing soil. You're gonna have to cap it with at least 2 feet of new compost to be able to grow on that site. Now that land that we use in the city, there were 1-year leases. I do not farm on any land that'll give me just one year, because you spend a lot of money in restoring that land, so you need long-term use. So you need at least 5 years. And what you should look for is land that'll never be developed. Some of these lots are too small with the current housing or the licensing or whatever you call it, the zoning, to put a house on. So you look for lots like that, and you should be able to get those for like $1 a year. But you need at least 5 years. So that's something that I don't know whether you all have gotten to that point, but it was like that in Milwaukee. But now we have 5 years at least. And one of the big projects that we're doing is we're putting 7,000 fruit trees that we received from a nursery and starting these urban orchards on vacant land. Because Milwaukee used to be a city with a lot of apple trees and pear trees and other fruit trees. And we need, you know, it takes 3 years just for those trees to start fruiting. So you need a lot of years. And we've also gotten land, 10 acres from the county recently. That was written into their budget. And that's the best case scenario, if you can get your government to write into the budget for the use of land. But again, this is going to take a lot of work, and that's why all of these groups in Detroit, and people are very territorial, so I know all groups don't work well together, but you need to do this if you want to be successful, is to be able to bring all of these groups together, and the issues we've talked about tonight, and keep it simple, because you need land. You can't do anything without land. You have to improve the land. You're going to have to compost and grow new soil. You're going to have to grow farmers. You got a lot of work ahead of you.
But when you started in Milwaukee, how much of the land that you are now farming was being used as something else, or was it just sitting? Was it just sitting empty?
It was basically sitting.
And it was in control of the government.
The city, in most cities, the city owns land. Probably, it depends on the city. The churches own a tremendous amount of land. Like in Chicago, the Presbyterian Church owns a lot of vacant land. Universities, like University of Chicago, has bought up all the land around the south side near Hyde Park. So they own land. So you have to do some research and find out who owns the land. There is some private land that you can get from folks, and most of our farms are on private land. But we were fortunate to have our national headquarters where we have the 3 acres to start out with that we own. So, and the infrastructure of the greenhouses and so forth. So.
Okay, this side.
Another question for Mr. Allen. You made a comment about nonprofits not being able to scale up this kind of movement, and you said that the key was going to be with entrepreneurs. But then you've also talked about kind of changes happening at the national government level. I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that middle ground and how things have changed in Milwaukee and potential for small-scale entrepreneurial changes to happen here, and how we move from that like grassroots movement into a larger scale and more sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, you have organizations like Greening of Detroit that are training people, D-Town, examples where they can train entrepreneurial farmers to be able to farm, because it is a skill. It's an art form to be a sustainable farmer. You don't create a farmer in a year or two. It takes time. So patience is one of the things that you all have to have. You know, it took us 22 years to get to where we are. It didn't happen overnight. To build the infrastructure, to be able to get the funding, to be able to change the policies, you got a lot of work to do. My suggestion would be, and the reason I said nonprofits aren't really designed to own large amounts of land. First of all, a lot of nonprofits don't have the skill sets. They don't have farmers that actually work inside nonprofit organizations for very long. Nonprofit organizations have people that move around to different nonprofits. It's not something, especially if they're funded, if their funding is coming from grant, if they're grant funded, and when a grant runs out, they have to lower their budget and people move about. But nonprofits have this tremendous role in terms of training folks and working with them on terms of creating like co-ops and also food hubs, so that the farmers don't have to do all their marketing. When a farmer leaves his farm, things go bad. When a farmer has to go out and sit at a farmer's market, everybody thinks these farmers just love to go sit at farmers markets all day. Not true. Farmer wants to stay on his land and farm, but because of the system doesn't work for them, the only way that they can stay in business is really to do that. But they lose a lot, and it's hard for them to scale up if they're out, you know, 3 days a week at farmers markets, and some of them go to 5 and 6 farmers markets on a Saturday. You know, I used to go to 13 farmers markets on a Saturday. I mean, you know, so you're away from the farm, you get back to the farm, bug infestation, butterflies have come into your corn, laid eggs, and the next thing you know, you lose half of your crop. So, you know, we have to look at this whole thing very realistically and get the type of training that's necessary to do this act.
This side.
Yeah, this is for everybody, I guess. I'm wondering if there's an inherent conflict between density and urban farming, because if you talk to most people who are urban planners, or they scream density, 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 and one of the things that makes, I guess, Milwaukee and Detroit places that urban farming can thrive is the fact that they have space. But is that space at the expense of things that density might solve? I'm just wondering, like, is that an inherent conflict, or is there a way to rectify that?
Yeah, I mean, Patrick has just talked about that. Vertical, vertical, vertical. When you think of Boston, when you think of New York, when you think of Vancouver, Tokyo, all those cities, they don't have horizontal land mass. We're going to have to build vertical farms. We're going to have to build walls like he's talking about, with plants on the facings south, especially if you're going to grow vegetables on the south facing of these buildings. So yeah, density is a challenge, but because most of the world's population is now living close to or inside cities, over 50% of the world's population now lives in cities or close to cities. So we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to feed people a different kind of way. That's why your generation is the generation that will figure this out. You know, it's on your shoulders now. We're just passing on what we know to you guys.
I was just living in Tokyo for the last 6 years, so yeah.
Okay, over here.
I will. My parents were actually part of that white flight in Milwaukee in the 70s. I grew up in Delafield, about half an hour west of Milwaukee, but as fate would have it, I moved to downtown Detroit about a decade ago. I'd like to build off the question the woman before me asked. You talked about how entrepreneurship and a for-profit model is what's ultimately going to allow urban farming to scale. You know, I see commercials for Pepsi and Velveeta, but I never see commercials for organic broccoli. You know, what is that in your mind? What does that really look like, and what's it going to take for this for the profit-driven world to scale urban farming?
Okay, to scale it up again, like I said, we need to grow some farmers. We have to have the skills to be able to scale it up. Everybody wants this food, but you know, these wholesalers realize that. That's why they're knocking on our door. Folks like Whole Foods, folks like you know, Cisco and U.S. Foods and Malio Produce in Milwaukee, one of the largest wholesale tomato operations. They have to help us. They have to pay the price to get what they want. We cannot let them just, you know, say, we want your food, grow it for us. You know, we're not going to do that. They're going to have to participate. One of the projects that we did this year is Malio Produce provided the funding to build hoop houses for us to grow food in. They own the infrastructure. We grow the food. They pay us for the food that we grow. It goes it's right next to their building. It goes right into the side door, those tomatoes. So situations like that we have to create, but we have to take a risk. It seems like we're such nice people in this industry. We're afraid to ask, you know, these companies for money. If they want it, they're going to have to participate in building the infrastructure for what we're asking for.
Hi, my name is Andy Che, and I'm a first-year farm entrepreneur. My question was kind of with the last gentleman, but I'm curious about how people see food as being overvalued or undervalued. I go to farmers markets and a lot of people tell me things are too expensive, and how do we scale up and deal with commercial agriculture or large-scale agriculture? How does a small organic farmer deal with that?
Yeah, well, we know that commercial food is cheap, but I don't know if you heard what Alice said and what she does with her restaurant. She pays those farmers a good price for the food. The farmers have to get paid. We only make 10 to 15 cents on the dollar. So we got to do better than that. That's why we don't have a lot of farmers. For me to convince you to become a farmer, I have to show you an economic model that you can take care of your family, you can live, you can make a living wage. You know, because one of the things that we do in our training programs is really have farmers really look at how many hours they're really working. You know, because if they seriously look at that and they find out they're making $2 an hour for the number of hours they work, we have to change that dynamic. And the only way to do that is to be able to get the wholesalers and folks that want our food to pay the real cost of food, because we're not really paying the real cost of food when you go to the grocery store. So I hear people complain about the prices at farmers markets. You know, until they actually go and do that act themselves, I guess that's the only way you can really understand what it really costs to grow, you know, an organic tomato or a sustainable or natural, something that's grown without chemicals, and how hard that is to do. So we have to continue to do this education piece, to educate the public about our food system. And it's working, because 15 years ago, it wouldn't be 20 people in this hall, okay? If we're talking about food, it'd be 20 people, okay? But look out, look how many people showed up to listen to an old crusty farmer like me, and a guy from France, and a woman from California. So, you know, I mean, we got to fix this thing, and I think the best thing to do, like, are you farming in the city?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, and that's the best way for a young farmer to cut your teeth on farming in the city, because land is cheap in the city. So, you know, and get more training. Don't just think that, you know, 1 year, I got it. You might have a successful year, and next year your farm might, you know, and we got to deal with climate change. So, you know, start thinking about growing in a hoop house. Very cheap to build if you build it yourself. Get the training. We do the training. Come on to Milwaukee, we'll train you. You know, there are people in this city that can train you, but if they won't train you, come to Milwaukee, we'll train you.
Okay, we have time for one more question on this side.
Hey, I'm so glad that's me. That's me. My name is Carl Nielbach, and I'm a resident from Detroit. I'm an inventor, a designer, an architectural ornamental metal specialist, and I would love to help you with your urban farm engineering needs, your irrigation needs, to invent windmills that irrigate your gardens with materials that we have readily available, that we are accustomed to since we are automotive industry. We can retool, we can redesign, we can reinvent. All we need is your criteria where we can help you with the vertical farms. We can create those vertical farms out of light poles, out of leftover materials. They are discarded now by industry. We're just waiting for the call for the right purpose to direct those energies so we can too be included in that economic surge that these urban farms bring to the urban community.
Yeah, and that's that's the reason that we need everybody at the table. We need architects, we need engineers, we need everybody to be able to, folks that do vertical, have the experience. This, you know, this guy's got 40, 50, 60, no, not 60, 40 years of knowledge, and we're willing to share that knowledge. So you need to be at the table. So maybe we can get his information, his email, and he can become part of the conversation.
Sure we can.
Here in Detroit, so.
Okay, that's all the time we're gonna have. I wanna thank our panelists, Will Allen, Patrick Blanc, and Alice Waters, who's no longer with us. And before you go, make sure you come up here. In the baskets in front of the podium is fruit from Jane Shulak's garden, and it is some of the tastiest
and her husband
stuff that I have.
So why don't you guys stand up? This is
stuff I have seen. So it's all
this is
for
good
the folks
food.
in the audience. Thank you very much for coming.